Can you all hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Great. Welcome to the event. It's co-hosted by the Resistance Center, the Anti-Imperialist Action Committee, the DSA, and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So welcome. If you just got here, if you feel inclined to just drop your name, your pronouns, where you're from, where you're living, and your organization in the chat, if you have one. Also, hello to Michaela's cat cameo experience. We'll just quickly give a quick introduction on what Red Books Day is, and we'll hear directly from Vijay Prashad, who's the co-chief editor of Leftward Books, which issued the original call for Red Books Day, and also the executive director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. So yeah, maybe let's just hear directly from Vijay, and we can hop into the event. Michaela, if you're able to play that.
Okay, so I just want to tell my co-hosts that while I'm using share, I can't chat with you in the chat box without obscuring the screen. So please use our Signal chat to do that if you need to tell me anything. But obviously, like, drop the links in the chat, like, once I unshare the screen and all of that. So I'm also admitting another person. Just also want to say welcome to everybody. And as is always the case, it's not always the smoothest thing to share a screen, but I'm going to do my very best here. And everyone can see that?
Hi, I'm Vijay Prashad, Chief Editor.
Everyone can see?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, let me just do big screen.
Hi, I'm Vijay Prashad, Chief Editor of Leftward Books based in New Delhi. About 2 years ago, those of us who were in the Indian Society of Left Publishers decided to honor the 21st of February because on that day in 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels released the Communist Manifesto. We thought that if all across India on the 21st of February, if people came out into public places and read the manifesto in their own languages, it would be a nice way to talk about the importance of left thought, left writing, and to honor our traditions. Well, the idea spilled out of India very quickly, and the first Red Books Day was held on the 21st of February 2020. The day began in Seoul, South Korea, in a loft where several young people sat in a row and they read out the Communist Manifesto in Korean. It went all across to Tamil Nadu in South India, where people stood at the Great Statue of Labour in Chennai and read out the Communist Manifesto in Tamil. It traversed the whole of India, went across North Africa, eventually to Cuba, where at the center Martin Luther King, young people sat around in their office and they read the Communist Manifesto, going all the way out to Santiago, Chile. By the end of it, as far as we understood, about 60,000 people came out in public and read this book from 1848, the Communist Manifesto, read it out to each other in their own languages. Of course, right after Red Books Day #1, the pandemic struck. This year, we're treating Red Books Day as a sort of bridge to next year. But nonetheless, we have many activities planned. On social media, we're encouraging people to talk about their favorite Red books every day, to post them, to tag their friends, use the hashtag Red Books Day 2021. And then finally, on February 21st, 2021, we're encouraging you to do all kinds of creative things, to take the Communist Manifesto, this book written by two crazy Germans about the problems of capitalism, which we know so acutely, which have been revealed during the pandemic. Take this book on the 21st of February, go online, go in public, go with your friends, do something, read this book out in your own language. And then, of course, we'll see you again on February 21st, 2022, when we'll be back in large numbers on the streets, chanting the words of this book, talking about the hobgoblins, talking about the specter that haunts capitalism, the specter of communism. See you on Red Books Day.
All right. So just a few ground rules to begin. As all of us might be a little bit used to Zoom at this point, things or done a little differently across orgs. And so what we're going to do for stack, once we get to the point at which we start taking stack, is instead of using the chat, we're going to use the raise hand function, which if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see reactions, and there's a raise hand. If there is no raise hand, it just means that you might need to open up participants and use raise hand there. So let's all try it. Let's try to find where we can raise hand, and everybody raise their hands. If anybody's having any trouble finding it, just let us know.
Can we lower it down now?
Okay. We're just going to call that good. If you do have trouble finding raise hand function at the last minute, just go ahead and let's see here. Everybody lower their hands. You should be able to lower your hands. Okay. Just doing that to make sure that everybody's got functionality. And if you are having trouble getting your hand raised, you can message one of the hosts and let them know. We're also not going to be using the chat to chat with each other, just so we can all stay focused and together. And there are a couple other ground rules. One is kind of in organizing circles, we use step up, step back. In this case, we're going to be doing a lot of reading out loud, and people can jump on stack. We're also going to be using progressive stack. So, you know, those who haven't gone yet will be able to, you know, go ahead of somebody who's maybe gone before. Also, we're going to be privileging those who are historically underheard in circles of organizing and politics. So that said, I think that we're ready to move right on. We have another person coming. I'm really excited about how many people are here. This is great. So I think, Selena, you're up.
Everyone, so I'm just going to share my screen and dive right in. Oh, did that work? Oh, there we go. Let's see. 1 second. 1 year into the pandemic, and it's okay. Great. I think you should all be able to see my screen. So we heard from Vijay Prashad directly kind of about what Red Books Day is about, and we decided to host an event in Western Massachusetts for a few reasons. One is to stand in solidarity with left publishers and organizations around the world. It's in response to a call that was issued from Leftward Books and other publishing houses originally in India, as Vijay mentioned, but also because we think it's really important to study our history and study our theory as a weapon and a tool of struggle. And so we want to kind of frame the event from that perspective, that we're not reading this because we're bored, it's a nice Sunday afternoon, sunny outside. We're not reading it because just to kind of like sound smarter or be smarter, but we're reading it because we think that it's part of deepening our knowledge as a tool of struggle. So with that said, if I can, there we go. A lot of people ask what an old white guy might have to do with our current struggles. This is the 173rd anniversary of the Communist Manifesto. So these are just kind of some, I'm not sure if you recognize these faces, but some of the leaders, actually all in the Global South, predominantly, at least not entirely, predominantly in the Global South, who have used Marxism and used political theory as a tool of struggle, whether from national liberation movements to current struggles with the All India Democratic Women's Association in India. This has long been and continues to be an important part of struggle. And so on that note, this week, ahead of Red Books Day, up in the top left, Subuza Kodi is the founder, one of the founders of the Abahlali Baziam Jondolo, is the shack dwellers movement in South Africa. Issue was among the organizations and leaders to release a statement on Red Books Day. Abahlali was founded in the early 2000s, and we sent an interview with him out via email if you'd like to read more about them. But has been really instrumental in the struggle for land and the struggle for justice for shack dwellers in South Africa. And without further ado, we'll read a small excerpt of their press statement this week, just talking about why Red Books Day is important. And I'm actually going to pick on, if we can pull it off technologically, pick on Kyo to read this out, and then I'll ask for another volunteer to read the next slide, just to kind of frame this event and what we're doing here today. So Kyo, do you want to go ahead?
Hey y'all. Okay, here we go. It is often said that Marxism is an ideology that is too complicated for an ordinary person from the shacks. This is because those who are regarded as scholars are often detached from the people on the ground. They often want to think for the oppressed instead of humbling themselves to think with the oppressed. They fail to understand Marx's point that communism is the real movement that abolishes the present state of things. Theory without struggle does not change anything. Struggle without theory can easily be co-opted or settle for local gains. Genuinely radical thought must be worked out in struggle, in the movement of the oppressed. Comrade Sibu Zikode, a founding member of our movement and our elected president, often says, "We must break down the complicated politics so that even an old go-go from the rural areas can understand. Theory must enable people to understand the world and their struggle better. It must never be used to make the people seem ignorant and to monopolize knowledge, just like how land, cities, wealth, and power are monopolized by a small elite under capitalism."
Thanks, Kyo. So just to kind of think about why we're here today, why we're reading the manifesto, and to take kind of cues and leadership from people like Sibu Zikode, who've long fought for a better world that we want to live in. And so the way that today will work is we're gonna kind of just have this opening session and framing how we're thinking about these ideas. Well, then we'll go a little bit into the manifesto, kind of learning a little bit more about, Michaela will take us through how kind of some background on the manifesto. We'll look at some excerpts and then break out into discussion groups and come back as a group. So while we're thinking about the manifesto, while we're thinking about these different ideas and our current struggles, I just really want to encourage people. We'll send some discussion questions in a few minutes and later in the event, but I just really want to encourage people to ground these questions in these ideas and in this framing that I could not possibly have said any better than Bahlali. And so on that note, just want to look at another excerpt quickly from Walter Rodney, who was a scholar in Guyana. He's also a militant who was assassinated for his ideas in the 1980s and was a very important part of leading the struggle for people in Guyana. So if I could actually get a volunteer, so you're not just hearing my voice. One person maybe wants to unmute themselves and read this. Does anyone feel like volunteering?
I'll do it. It's Caridad.
Hey, Caridad.
Hey, everyone. Marxism and African Liberation. Walter Rodney, Queens College, New York, 1975. African people, like the other third world people, have virtually a vested interest in scientific socialism because it offers itself to them as a weapon of theory. It offers itself to them as that tool at the level of ideas, which will be utilized for dismantling the capitalist imperialist structure. Marxism does not simply appear as a summation of other people's history, but appears as a living force within one's history. And this is a difficult transformation. This is the task of anybody who considers himself or herself a Marxist. However, because it is fraught with so many difficulties and obstacles, many people take the easy route, which is to take it as a finished product rather than ongoing social product, which has to be adapted to their own society. As Cabral said, there may be revolutions which have had a revolutionary theory and which have failed, but there has certainly been no revolution which has succeeded without a revolutionary theory.
Thank you, Caridad. So one last excerpt before we'll go into the main section of the event. If I can get one last volunteer. This is also Walter Rodney. This is a quote from the Russian Revolution. So Walter Rodney from Guyana was writing about the Russian Revolution. He was writing about this, I believe, in the somewhere mid-1960s, 70s, about why the Russian Revolution was important for militants, activists, and intellectuals in the global South. And I want to give credit to Praxis, which is a teaching program in Vermont, which is the study in which I read this book. But I'm wondering if I could get one more volunteer to read this quote before we move on. You can just unmute yourself and read it.
That aspect of Marxism which lays claim to universal validity is its method, the scientific method of dialectical materialism. Like any other scientific method, it produces results on being applied to a given set of data or conditions.
Thank you. So I want to just again ground this conversation in asking why we're here, why we're reading Marx. And I think just to frame that, we'll talk more about that question later in discussion groups and as a group, but just as an initial proposal for that is to sharpen our tools of struggle, to deepen our commitment to internationalist, anti-racist, anti-imperialist, feminist, liberational thought and struggle. And so with that, I will turn it over to Michaela to kind of give us some more information and background on the manifesto.
All right, so I have some prepared comments, but I also, want to just say that it's really great again to see everybody here ready to talk about this incredibly influential text. Many of you might have read it before. It even is sometimes assigned in high school for reasons that one can speculate on, whether it's supposed to be a commercial against communism or whether it's supposed to be just simply reading it as part of history is anyone's guess. But I'm going to take a few minutes to provide some context for the manifesto, both how it relates to Marx's own work and political development, and also kind of trying to show like what exactly the theory was and why it remains such a touchstone today. And I think it's really important to recognize that we're in a moment where many are becoming much more familiar with Marx and Engels' works, both the manifesto, but also Capital, also some of the other materials, and there's a lot, because many are becoming much more hopeful that an economic and political alternative to capitalist domination could be possible in our lifetimes. We're in a really crucial moment, and it's kind of scary, especially with the rise of the far right happening at the same time. But also, I think that thinking about this text sort of in the light of 2021, I loved Vijay's video. It just shows how timely it is that people come back together to read this. So as you know, the manifesto was written in 1848, but it might be Marx's and Engels' widest read text. It's not even close to a summary or culmination of what Marx developed regarding his economic and political beliefs and his contributions to emergent socialist and communist movements during his lifetime and beyond. So although we tend to think of Marxism as having a quite concrete set of doctrines, reading more reveals that there was a lot of open experimentation and changed opinion with Marx himself as history unfolded, and he moved closer to his own convictions. So, if you look at more Marx of what came before and what comes after the manifesto, you can kind of track Marx's own movement towards becoming a Marxist. The first volume of Capital, which is his fullest and most coherent sort of set of economic and political theories, wouldn't even be published until almost 20 years after the manifesto. So if you think about it in a timeline of theory, the Communist Manifesto was actually fairly nascent in some ways. And even though obviously it's an incredibly important document, thinking about it kind of as a first try to engage with something new, I think is an interesting way to look at it. Between the manifesto and between Capital, there's a lot of material, and I encourage you to kind of, tool around with that. I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat of a couple documents, but there's plenty there. And some of it was unfinished, and some of it was directly responsive to current events. And we can look at those texts to see clues as to what was shifting or becoming more solid in Marx's thoughts, so we can ourselves think about how we might want to take up these texts as useful tools for our own political work, on the conditions and on the terrains that we find ourselves now. So thinking about this historically and also thinking with Marx rather than taking what Marx says and just kind of being like, well, Marx said it, so it must be right. If I'm a Marxist, that's what it means. It's really actually about ongoing study and ongoing inquiry. He began his writing life notably as a rebellious philosophy and law student, him very frustrated with what he saw as German philosophy's non-responsiveness to the material conditions of human existence. And at the time, a philosopher named Friedrich Hegel dominated the discourse. It's kind of the quintessential idealist, or the belief that ideas and what happens in the mind is the moving force of history. But instead of the primacy of ideas and that society and history was shaped by individual or even collective wills that are inborn to persons, Marx argued that it was the material conditions of life that fundamentally shaped social relations. But he did preserve one very key concept from Hegel, which is the dialectical conception of historical movement. So in this theory, there are two sides. That's the dia part of dialectic that push against each other in struggle to create an eventual break. And then out of that break comes the next epoch in history, and so on and so on. So that's what Marx takes from Hegel. If you can kind of imagine, like, don't like Hegel because he's an idealist, but I like dialectics, so I'm taking that and I'm going to make my theory out of that. For Marx, the vehicle of this dialectical movement of history is class struggle. The proletariat and the bourgeoisie, as it's framed in the manifesto. And this is actually a material force in the world. It's the struggle over control of the means of production, which is land and everything that comes out of the land, all resources, and also how to spend our time. So he came to understand that what all average humans have, when everything else is stripped away, is labor power, to create the shared material conditions for ourselves, to create the conditions of life. And the labor power of the vast majority, the proletarians or the working class, is relentlessly exploited unjustly by the few, the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production. And this exploitation is made possible by privileging private property and the rights that have been created to protect it. So that not only permits unequal wealth accumulation through economic markets based on exchanging wages for labor, but it actually creates the belief that somehow this is all fair, right? So preserving that wage relation in their favor is the entire raison d'etre of capitalists. And they do so by exerting huge amounts of legal, political, social, and economic power. Stopping workers from joining together in collective action is the key strategy of this project, and it happens in myriad ways. Ending that injustice and ending exploitation is therefore the entire project of socialists. So capitalists and socialists are opposites. They were created as terms to describe the people who are holding the means of production and the people who are politically opposed to that, right? In order to eventually create a world where private property is a thing of the past. And that achievement for Marx would be the communist society of total equality, but not, as is commonly believed, a world where no one's allowed to own anything. So personal property still exists under communism, what we would call our belongings rather than our assets. Assets are meant to appreciate in value so that they can be sold on the market. Hence the accumulation of wealth in unequal ways. So for Marx, the communist horizon and the struggle to get there is not abstract or idealist, but concrete and revolutionary. Understanding the world in this way, he believed, doesn't just reshape how we think about ourselves and others. It demystifies existing social relations and creates new social relations. Knowing that exploitation is happening and that something else can happen is what Marx believed the working class needed to understand as a whole to break free from the chains of exploitation. It's the first step in putting the class in motion. So workers of the world unite is a stirring call to action at the end of the manifesto, but it's also kind of a kind of slogan summary of what Marx believed must be done and the only thing to be done to move human history forward and out of capitalism. So it was only a few years before he wrote the manifesto that he came to call this theory of how everything works historical materialism. And in a set of theses he wrote at the time, challenging the thinking of another philosopher, or maybe even deciding, to hell with this, I'm not going to call myself a philosopher anymore. He said this: philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. So we can see the manifesto as an intervention to try to use his increasingly concrete convictions to try to change the world and not just interpret or think about it. It's a pamphlet addressed to all workers. The messaging was supposed to get out to everyone who needed to hear it through the vehicle of the party, an international communist party. And Marx's activism, including his membership in the International Working Men's Association, led him to try to intervene in other social justice issues and major events of the day. For example, he wrote to Lincoln in support of the war to end slavery. And I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat. It actually has the letter and it also has the response. So without overstatement, I think it can be said that the manifesto changed the world. And although this is less my direct area of expertise than others who are on this call, the Marxian strategy of creating mass workers' parties to conquer capitalist exploitation and oppression was a primary motivating force for revolutionary activity and real wins in dozens of places all over the world. Obviously in Russia, but then Cuba, in China, in the former Gold Coast in Africa, in South Africa has been, alluded to here, and in nearly every country in South and Central America. Thinkers, organizers, and leaders globally took this revolutionary idea of history and class conflict and adapted it to their needs, and sometimes decided to break with it entirely, but not without first advancing the revolutionary impulse found in Marx. And this is all to say that despite its shortcomings and a lack of theorization of some political and historical terrains outside of Europe in the 19th century, revolution owes itself to that beard. So I'm going to stop here, just thank you all. And next up, I believe we are doing breakouts. Is that the case, or we're doing the readings? Okay, fantastic.
Thank you, Michaela. That was a really fantastic presentation. And, thinking about grounding Marxism, in our current reality, Selena is going to jump in and talk about one of the other motivations of Red Books Day, and then we'll get started, reading the manifesto itself.
So just one other kind of taking us back to what we talked about in the beginning about grounding this conversation in our own struggles and our own organization. It's worth noting, just to kind of drive the point home, that these ideas are tools of struggle, and they're ideas that are, and knowledge that is perceived as dangerous by those in power and by the capitalist class. Some of you may have seen, I'll drop some links in the chat in a couple of minutes, but NewsClick is a media house in India, based in Delhi, that's been reporting on the farmer strikes. There have been massive farmer strikes in India, and most of the mainstream press, which is very much aligned with the ruling class, rich people's interests, have not actually given voice to farmers' demands, and NewsClick has. NewsClick has gone out and given excellent coverage and excellent reporting, actually letting the people who are very sharp and smart people and organizers who are going through tremendous risks in these strikes, it's going to actually given voice to those struggles. And as a result, the Modi far-right government in India has been cracking down, has gone after it. NewsClick has gone after other activists. This last week, that's what I'll put some articles in the chat in a minute, but this last week, the Modi government raided the NewsClick office. It detained the leadership, Prabir and Pranjal and others, kept them in the NewsClick office and in their homes. Prabir is a 75-year-old man who has some health concerns. They wouldn't let him leave. They wouldn't let him talk to anybody else, and they interrogated him, and etc. for days. And so I just want to drive home that, like, we're not here just, I like reading books. It's fun. It's a fun thing to do, but just to show that, like, really there is an importance of having the knowledge and having a theory to back up our struggles. And if it weren't, then people like Pranjal and Prabir and organizations like NewsClick wouldn't be persecuted the way that they are by the right. And so with that, we'll dive into the excerpts. I'll put some links in the chat. One is to NewsClick's website. They report in Hindi and in English. I encourage you to check it out. And the other articles are from Liberation News, which is the news organization of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which wrote about what's going on there. So with that, Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Selena. So before we get started reading the excerpts, I guess we'll go over the procedure a little bit. So I think we're gonna, just jump around and like read a paragraph at a time. So I'm gonna call on someone randomly if they'd like to read. If you don't feel comfortable reading or if you don't feel like reading, you can pass. But I think the idea is going to be, so if you read, call on someone next for the next paragraph to read, and then we'll take a few pauses after reading a few excerpts to kind of go over some of the terminology and see if any questions are raised, but we're going to have a larger, fuller conversation after we get through these excerpts. And then also a note on the language, so Marx and Engels were writing in the middle of the 19th century, and like Michaela mentioned, they're like limited by this white European worldview. So the idea that like working men of the world should unite, is a little antiquated in our idea. It's workers should unite, like we don't view them as working men. Workers are people. Similarly, Marx referred to quote unquote civilized and quote unquote backward nations, whereas we understand them as imperialist and colonized nations. So just keep that in mind when you read the language. But I think the excerpts are incredibly powerful, and I'm gonna share a presentation now and we can get started. Can everyone see that? Great. Okay, so let's see. Would Akil or Nora like to read the first paragraph?
Hey everybody. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. By bourgeoisie is meant the class of modern capitalists, owners of the means of social production and employers of wage labor. By proletariat, the class of modern wage laborers who, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor power in order to live.
The modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with its class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of the old ones.
Great, and then Nora, if you could call on someone else to read the next quote, please.
Sorry, we can't. Would Miranda read the next quote, please?
Yeah. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinct feature. It has simplified class antagonism. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Right. Oh, and I'll pass it to someone else. Maybe to Cole.
Say what?
Do you want to read this next slide, Cole?
Oh, sure. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally, gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development.
And then Cole, would you mind calling someone else, please?
I can't see the faces. Akil?
Well, we just read, yeah, we could. Okay, I'll just read this real quick. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant motor industry. The place of the industrial middle class by industrial millionaires. The leaders of the whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeoisie. Modern industry has established the world market for which the discovery of America paved the way. And then we will call on JR.
The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production, and with them, the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in an unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of the production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, and everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away, and all formed new ones become antiquated before they can ossify. And this is like one of my favorite quotes of Marx, so it's really coincidental that I'm being chosen. But all that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. And let's see, Ernesto.
Sorry, it's coming off mute. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. And I'll pass it over to Jeffrey.
The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to the production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up the indigenous raw material, but by raw material drawn from the remotest zones, industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of old local and national seclusion of self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production, the intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures, there arises a world literature. And I'll pass it to Jonathan.
The essential conditions for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeois class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on competition between the laborers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers due to competition by the revolutionary combination due to association. The development of modern industry, therefore, cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces, above all, are its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. And I will kick it over to Manny.
We communists have been approached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquired property as the fruits of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. How one self-acquire, self-earned property? Do you mean the property of petty artisans and of the small peasant, a form of property that proceeded the form? the development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it and still destroy it daily. And I'll pass it to Hector.
We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only so far as the interest of the ruling class requires it. I'm gonna pass it to Janaki.
If Janaki isn't here right now, would someone else like to volunteer?
I can take it. Let's see. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for the 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the very few is solely due to the non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for those for whose existence is a non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say individuality vanishes. And let's see, Trish?
Hello. You must therefore confess that by individual, you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Communism deprives no person of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive them of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriations. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness, for those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of tautology, that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. Arco? If you're there? Caridad, do you want to speak again?
I'm going to choose someone else. Maybe I'm looking at here.
Hey, I'm actually
Julia? Oh, RK is here. All right, go for it, RK.
Yeah, sorry, audio mess up. That the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. And next I will pass it. Is Kate Edwards here?
Yes. When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. The proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class. If, by means of a revolution, it makes itself the ruling class and, as such, sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And I will pass to Michael.
Thank you, Kate. And this is the last slide. So the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workers of all countries, unite. Thank you, everyone. That was fantastic. So we're going to break into breakout rooms briefly. We're going to share some discussion questions to kind of—
Hold on. We're going to watch, I think we're watching a video first.
Oh,
right?
yeah, there's going to be a musical interludes first.
Yes, a musical interlude. So hang on, everybody. I'm about to knock your socks off with this sharing screen business. Where'd it go? Sorry.
We the people are the ones who gonna have to fight. We used to say, which side are you on? Which side are you on? The truth is, we're in so much debt that the only way out is revolution or war. So now the question is, which side are you on?
Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my lord? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my lord?
See, before I draw the line, let me welcome you close to all the folks who knew Obama sold the people a hoax. Gave the money to suckers while our community's still poor. Withdrew the troops but started another war. Colonizing, terrorizing, creating the oil crisis so they can make a killing on food and gas prices. Prisons is filling, they trying to lock up the future. Militarized borders and control of computers. Want a stupid bumping music that ain't healthy for the shortest. Privatizing schools and policemen in the hallways. Can't be dormant, I'm awoke and rise up, be ready. Brought the family with us and we hold the machetes.
Riding the fence, too many people be riding the fence. Yeah, you say you ready for war, but are you convinced? I'm not convinced. If you're a rider, freedom fighter, crowd excited, then let's do this. We can make one big united, middle finger to the US. Give me the bravest and the truest, fuck the hippest and the coolest. We gon' spark this revolution and cross this off our to-do list. Put your foot down if you look down on this criminal system. Put your book down and get shook down like my niggas in prison. Don't be condemning and condoning their actions in one sentence. Make up your mind, choose your side. Is you a patriot or a menace to society? So riot or sit by quietly. But don't pull out your flag and try to say you gon' ride with me. You flip-flopping like hip-hop, I don't get locked in that trick box. Get got like Big and Pop, shit's got to stop. I am the people, not the pig, I repeat after Fred. So please blow my brains out if I ever forget.
I'm with the independent thinkers, I'm down with the movers and the shakers and the ex-Henny drinkers, the non-smokers, the health advocates, the non-voters, the young bloods in the hood training like soldiers. I'm on the side of the tracks with the hood gardens, the little child that don't color inside the margins. I don't ride the fence, I cultivate my strength, cause if it ain't about power, it don't make sense. I've been down with Boogie Down since BDP and Brown Pride, and Black Power make RBG. A OG told me choose battles wisely. In the struggle, don't forget your children and your wifey. If you don't see me on the podium preaching it, every day I hope my every action is teaching it. Cause revolution is a process, it's not a speech or a panel. Don't bite off more than you can handle.
Rock hard like slingshots in Palestina. Con todos los estudiantes por educación gratuita. I'm with workers uprising and the right to unionize. We ain't crossed the border, so you better legalize. I'm with La Peña del Bronx. I'm still with Vitor Toro, cause gentrification is polluting my borough. So bro, never. South Bronx forever. Decolonize the block, make your neighborhood better. I ain't down with the rich, I'm more Richie Perez. Don't talk to grand juries or cooperate with feds. I'm with students, doctors, janitors, teachers. We need living wages, but they don't believe us. Monida, Barretto, Spofford, Hunts Point, my hood. I love, we join forces, forming our deck, BX. Taking over buildings, rebel Diaz for the children.
Politics to sickness, streets express symptoms. Caught up with a quickness, big business pimps them. Scholars play the simpleton, fools play with wisdom. Who will stand and fight back? Who will play the victim? Trials and tribulations, injured generations. Stolen history and outsourced innovation. Babel Tower fell, tribes are at war. The battle story's not represented in the score. The game's fixed, most of the faces and names switched. Credit stolen for art, science, religion, language, technology, philosophy, and what strange is. They paid in hatred for the knowledge of the ancients. Power in words, actions, guns, swords. Aim Panthers, brown berets, young lords. Pick a side, one sickness, one cure, one love, one blood, one world, but one war.
I apologize for all the boxes. I wasn't sure about which boxes were showing up or not and had no idea. So thanks everyone for alerting me to that. So are we ready with breakouts now? All right.
So folks should have gotten a prompt to enter breakout room. So if you are still with us, feel free to click that box. If not, you can hang out in this main room here and just reflect on these questions on the screen.
All right. So it looks like we had a few people who had to leave the group early. I know that some people couldn't be here for the whole thing, and we're going to try to shoot to end it at 2:30 because there is another event at 3. Michael, do you want to say a little bit about what that event is? And
sure, Selena probably knows more, but it's another commemoration of Red Books Day based in the People's Forum in New York City. And they're a wonderful, like, nonpartisan, hyper left-wing collection of activists, intellectuals based in New York, but their scope is really global. Selena can probably speak more to it.
Sure. So at the end of the event, I'll send out a link, but the Vijay, Prashad, and some of the other people who have been involved in calling for Red Books Day are going to speak on a panel at the People's Forum. This event is one of many events across the world in like dozens of languages, I think Spanish, Portuguese, Tamil, Hindi, etc. And so we're really excited to like get to have this conversation with people in Western Massachusetts who we like can continue to build with and organize with and like apply this to our own reality. And if people are like so revved up by this conversation that you want to go talk about the Communist Manifesto for another 2 hours, I will drop the link in the chat. And it'll also be recorded, so if you don't, you can always watch it later. But anyway, we're excited to have you here and for the group discussion.
yeah, and also they might pick out different excerpts, so you can actually read the entire Communist Manifesto piecemeal by just hopping to each event. Anyway, so I thought maybe what we could do is just, if you want to, you know, talk about what you talked about in your breakout groups or anything that, you know, has come to mind, like reflectively over the event, just raise your hand. I'll be facilitating the discussion, and then we'll leave a little bit of time to do some sort of finishing thoughts. So just, yeah, raise your hand if you'd like to share anything that has come up for you. Akil, and then Manny after Akil.
Oh, just in our breakout group, it's me, Nora, hey. In our breakout group, we got cut off, but Kari Dad was just responding to a question I had about this section on page 20 about the dangerous classes or the lumpen proletariat, the social scum, like, and he talks about how they are, you know, its conditions of life prepare it far more for the part of a bribed tool of reactionary intrigue. So it's like, Marx is saying like that it's harder to bring this, you know, kind of most oppressed stratum into the revolution, I think is what he's saying. Like it's, you know, it's not easy to politicize this group. And I was wondering why that is and if that, you know, what other thinkers have said about that.
Yeah, if anyone wants to do a direct response to that question. So the question is, why was Marx's theory of revolution reliant on the organized working class and like not the what was called the lumpen proletariat or those who are in the most oppressed strata of society? So does anyone have a direct response? It's a great question.
Well, Marx and Engels felt in the socialist movement has historically felt that by workers working together in the process of industrial production, they would learn to work collectively, and therefore they would be able to practice political action collectively as an outgrowth of that, first in the trade union struggle and then in socialist party politics. The lumpen proletariat, on the other hand, were seen as people who, you know, weren't working regularly and were thrown back on kind of individualism and scrabbling for existence in different ways, oftentimes illegal activities, and that their way of life, their training would not be conducive to collective action. And as somebody pointed out, the Black Panthers tried to turn this around and embrace the lumpen as a revolutionary force. I'm not sure what the historical verdict on that was.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great example because it really was also about combining a program of liberation from poverty with sort of a Marxian framework of revolutionary struggle, right? So it was also about, you know, creating a pride of identity with the people that the Black Panther Party was looking to organize and to serve, but to also try to start providing the basics of life so that people can, you know, could transcend that, you know, that kind of strata separation, and be able to actually not just, you know, necessarily get jobs, but actually become a militant collective force for struggling for liberation. So Manny, you're up. And then after that, Trish, and then if anyone else wants to jump on Stack.
Okay, so we had a great group, and Michael and Jonathan, John, editor, thank you. There was a lot of we discussed the first, and one thing that Michael brought to me was you know, about how the media exploits everything, and the media makes you know, this own circus that, and then the people that are too much close to the media, then they follow the rhetoric, and so it makes it so hard for people to really know what is real and what is not. So that's one. And then, you know, about education, like without education, people will not know what really has happened in the world. People will know what's happening in the past. They, you know, we've been live forever for, you know, for so many things that have happened. And you know, Marx says that, you know, the means of production is, you know, for the people, but the bourgeoisie, they always wanted to create, you know, like it was with in the time of the slaves, you know, that in the South they created the cotton gin because they wanted to, but that production wasn't going to be for the slaves. It was going to be for them to sell and then to keep all the profits for themselves. So they always want more. But by wanting more is, they don't care who does the product, as long as they're satisfied. And there was two more things that I can relate to, and about the South, and how, you know, I said to myself, I said to the group that the South are also our brothers. It's just that you know, because of what was happening in the last 20 years, that, you know, a lot of places and a lot of factories close, and, you know, and they move away, you know, overseas, and a lot of industries, and these people lost everything. So they lost trust in the government. They lost trust on everybody. And when, you know, Donald Trump came and said, "Hey, I'm here for you. I'm gonna be the guy that's gonna look out for you," and everything, everybody went after, you know, and they believe in him, and they went after him, and they voted for him, and they still, just 75 people that voted for him. I would say that maybe 10% of them were bourgeoisies, but most of the people are proletariats, but they believe in him. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle all the way you see it.
That's a really great question. I think it's actually one of the biggest questions that we can kind of ask ourselves, is even as there is a higher kind of like consciousness of like the possibility of socialist ideas, we also have this, you know, very, you know, bizarrely, but nonetheless compelling figure in someone like Trump. But it's, you know, there's also Orban in Hungary. There's, you know, other right-wing leaders. There's obviously Bolsonaro as well. So, I mean, thinking through like, how do these struggles that Marx not only identified and diagnosed, but predicted would continue, how do they sort of like map onto our political terrain? It's a really great point. So Trish, you're up.
I feel really, I'm just echoing Akil and Manny, and just like sitting with like the frustration with the way that, you know, capitalist sympathizing entities so readily and continuously co-opt like the ideas of even unionizing, so the ideas in the word socialism, in order to like make it a weapon against it. And like right now, a perfect example is like Texas and the government politicians just saying like, this is because of the Green New Deal that you're like suffering from a loss of, you know, fossil fuel right now. Like, and that it's successful. And I'm frustrated with how successful that seems to always be, which is what I feel like is what Manny and Akil were getting into a bit. But just the same thing, just like, what do we do?
Or as Lenin would say, what is to be done? Okay, so Akil, go ahead. Or
I just wanted to just quickly add, because I think it's this unique feature of liberalism to channel potential revolutionary dissent into capitalist expression. I think that's the thing that we kind of are always butting our heads against, is that these things happen in the environment and just the failure of the economy, all these things that should, get the proletariat energized. And then here comes liberalism to say like, well, no, here, you can buy this thing and that'll fix your problems, or you can pay for this training and that'll fix your problems. And I think that's the thing that we have to figure out how to like break that cycle of, because we're, most people are just, it's hegemonic. People just expect that you can, buy something, you can follow something on social media, and that's going to be the thing that addresses this material lack that you have. And,
yeah, I think that goes, towards the incredible amount of political and social power that capital can spend and, in order to maintain its position. But any other responses to that? And I just wanted to also say what you were saying, Trish, about like, it seems to work. I'm really interested in that question, because I also wonder whether it's like most people just aren't paying attention to, like, there's some people who are deeply, sort of invested in like one side, and there's others who are deeply invested in the other side. Obviously, we've heard of political polarization, and then there's a whole bunch of people who just don't have a political consciousness, and maybe they don't vote, but maybe they also intentionally don't vote for reasons that are, clearly, reasonable reasons. Sorry, use reason twice. Go ahead, Ernesto.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how it's more than just so there's a couple of pieces there, but one thing is having to have a debate out in the open, because otherwise, if debates are had in small places, the majority of the people who don't have an opinion one way or the other don't get to see it had out. So recently we were having a discussion with someone that finances solar projects. They said that the reason why electricity is cheaper is simply because they're just inherently cheaper, and that's what they said. And then someone on our side talked about how after the initial investment of money, solar is free basically forever. You have to maybe replace panels years on, and it was just like this they just drop a belief, and then if no one questions it, it stays there. And so we're having this happen, but then there's also this other element of not just the means of production, but the technology. Now it's a means of distribution. So it's like, it's not solid, it's an idea. So it's like, as ideas are transmitted through these lines of communication and distribution of information, who controls those? And so like, that's an even bigger issue. Thanks to technology, we're being boxed into another sort of situation that doesn't allow that kind of debate to happen. So like, we definitely need to have open debate where it can't be shut down.
Totally, yeah. Karl?
Thanks. I think to answer some of that question, right, I think study and political education are things that we have to try to do where we do our work. I totally believe that, knowing having knowledge of what's happening and the structures and all that allows people to be engaged in their own struggle. So for me, political education, Of course, I'm a teacher, so that's going to happen. But in our places of struggle too, in our organizations, in our own families, right? And also ourselves being prepared. So for me, I hadn't read the Communist Manifesto. I don't even know if I read the whole thing 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I can't even remember. So coming back to it was great. So I appreciate being able to do that. And COVID has allowed many of us to be able to study regularly. And that has made such a difference in my own skill set and ability to talk about these things with people. And so I think that that's a very fundamental piece that we need to do. Political education, self-education, and education with the collective.
Absolutely. Well said. Any responses to what anyone has said so far? Anything new folks want to kind of bring up before we start winding down? Anyone new hasn't got a chance to speak yet? Want to say anything? Okay, Manny, go ahead, but just try to keep it short because we're running out of time, okay?
Yeah. All I'm saying, I was somebody just wrote something in the chat, and really, and the thing is fear. Counterproductive did a real bad job in so many of the groups like the Black Panther Party and the the Young Lords and BL movement, and I know they're doing. I'm pretty sure I gotta have a carpet this big right now in Canada. But that's what a lot of people are afraid of, and they don't want, they don't want to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing out there is that what we're faced with is, maybe it's also a studied kind of resignation to things aren't really going to change, like we're not. And this is, I think, goes to that question of the lumpen proletariat, which is the name for people who are so alienated that they don't have even a way to think about how to be together. At least workers working together have that, forced kind of organization. And what, the idea of that kind of serving as a vehicle, that like putting the working class in motion is about like sort of that pragmatic sense of how do we take that labor relation that's oppressive and actually try to create forms of solidarity there, right? In order for us to be able to collectively struggle together. And this actually, that goes out into the world too. So I think what Karl said about how political education has helped make the conversations easier, be able to like feel confident and like, persuasion. Somebody in my group brought up argument. I also think that, persuasion is a good way of putting it too, because what we want to do is also learn those crucial skills on organizing in order for us to be able to meet people where they're at, right? And like really be able to kind of get people to see things clearly, but see things from their own perspective, right? Not something that's imposed upon them by someone who's like, I know better than you. Let me look it up and like, find the right Marx quote to throw at you, right? Like it really is integrated. Jane McAlevey, who is a really great organizer and scholar of the labor movement, talks a lot about how people learn through organizing. Like when you have an organizing project and you are together with your comrades, you actually learn together how to do things and also talk with each other about your struggle. So the teachers' strikes in West Virginia is a great example of that. A really great example of how people became radicalized through struggle, and you expand your capacity then, right? It's a virtuous cycle if it's not co-opted, right? If it's not co-opted by those who want to potentially say, it's really great that you've organized all this stuff. Let's direct it towards something that's, a little bit less confrontational or a little bit less, this or that, or let's invite, the boss to the table to kind of, moderate this discussion. So anyway, I think that we're a little past time. We're trying to make sure people are able to get out of here in a way that lets them have the rest of their day. But I really so happy to have, joined in this with you all. And I just want to say, you know, we're your local chapter of the DSA. We cover Franklin, Hampden, and Hampshire counties, and we have a couple of events coming up. I'm just going to drop them in the chat. One is what we call our Socialist Night School. It's actually during the day, though. It's Sunday, February 28th at 3 o'clock, and it's about electoral work and socialist politics. And then the next one is actually a more sort of practical educational opportunity to learn about budgets. So local budget fights in relation to defund the police, in relation to taxing the rich. And that's going to be March 2nd at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to drop the links there and also pass it on to my other hosts, my gracious and lovely host. I also want to thank Miranda for helping out with setting up all the text. That was awesome.
Yeah, so the event, everyone knows, is co-hosted by the DSA, the Anti-Imperialist Action Committee, the Resistance Center, and Party for Socialism and Liberation in Western Massachusetts. So we just wanted to take a couple of minutes to encourage people to, if you're not already involved in an organization, to join an organization and put these ideas into practice. If you are involved in an organization, to learn more about what else is going on in the Valley, which is much broader in the scope of this collaboration, of course. But so the Anti-Imperialist Action Committee, just to give folks a sense of who we are, how to get in touch with us, and what we're working on. We came into existence about 1.5 years ago under another name, under the Bolivia Solidarity Committee, after the coup in Bolivia in October of about 1.5 years ago, and just kind of like out of an angry email chain of like, what the fuck, this what happened in the 60s, like we're not going to sit and continually, but we're not going to sit around and just watch it happen. And so we started organizing delegations, pre-pandemic delegations against senators, but 2 senators, Markey Warren and Congressman McGovern, to really pressure them to use their political power to denounce US intervention in Bolivia, which was the US heavily backed and encouraged and funded the coup. And so since that time, Socialist left-wing party is back in power in Bolivia, which is great. And I think that continued solidarity is important. And so we're kind of like changed the scope of our organization a little bit to be an action-oriented group that both values action and pressure of whether it's of local officials or growing working class power here in the belly of the beast, and kind of melding that together with studies so that the way that we're doing that is kind of like following the conversations that we're having here. So I will drop our email in the chat if you want to get in touch with us. You should have hopefully gotten an email from us about this event, so feel free to get in touch with us that way as well. But we're kind of right now, we're taking a look at what our next work looks like and what does it mean to be an anti-imperialist in the belly of the beast. So if you would like to be a part of that conversation and putting that into action, let us know. Michael and Miranda, if you want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing.
Sure. So I'm with the Anti-Imperialist Action Committee as well, but I'm also a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So we're a nationwide revolutionary socialist party. I'm going to share a few links both to our newspaper and to our digital school, which is another way to study, Marxism globally. Locally, we're a new branch, in Western Massachusetts, but we have larger branches in New York and Boston, all over the country. But it's a great time to get involved because we're still kind of shaping what we're going to be doing. Locally, we've organized a few study groups. We've supported BLM marches. We've expanded a trade unionist initiative to support comrades and activists who were arrested in Denver for their BLM activity. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Miranda. And once again, thank you, Miranda, for all of the tech work, and thank you to the co-hosts for making this event possible.
Yeah, thank you all. Tech work is kind of easy compared to what you did to hold the space for this really important conversation. So thank you. Yeah, I'm Miranda. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with both the Anti-Imperialist Action Committee and the Resistance Center for Peace and Justice. The Resistance Center is a small anti-war anti-military nonprofit in Northampton. And there are a couple different ways you can plug into our campaigns. They all are looking to address the ways the military industrial complex shows up in our community. One thing we work on that's really meaningful to me is looking at military recruiters and their presence in high schools, particularly low-income high schools. And we also look at big weapons contractors here in Western Massachusetts. So a lot of people don't know, like one of the top 10 weapons contractors in the world has a branch right in Northampton, kind of like hiding next to the community garden. So I'll put some contact info there in the chat. We also, I'm putting a link to our community calendar, which is a lot of really amazing anti-war, anti-imperialist events across the valley. And I think that's all. I'll pass
Yeah,
it
but
back
we
to
are
Nicole.
going to close out with a song. And as we do this, we'll just, maybe say goodbye and maybe like little last thoughts in the chat. Once again, it was really wonderful to co-host this event with my people, and we're gonna hopefully do more. So without further ado, a classic with a twist, I think, right, Selena?
Arriba los pobres del mundo, de pie los
Michaela, I think the audio stopped.